The gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you. Secretary Geithner, earlier this week we had a hearing on AIG's bailout, and at that hearing you acknowledged that AIG fully met its obligations to foreign banks and certain U.S. banks or financial companies. In fact, at that time you said that throughout this period of time, and this is critically important to the stability of the system, we wanted to make sure AIG was able to meet its commitments. I said to you, to pensioners and retirees, and your response was also to municipalities and banks, and that you considered they had met a full range of their obligations. Since that time, I have been informed that AIG is now attempting to force many of its creditors that are U.S. banks to accept severe reductions of more than 70% on the total debt owed to them. This disparity in the treatment between foreign banks, which within, as you said in your response to my question, were paid dollar for dollar within hours of the bailout, and U.S. banks, many of them taxpayers who funded this bailout, have yet to receive any payment and are being asked to accept 70 and 80% haircuts. This disparity in treatment between foreign banks and U.S. banks is very concerning to me. This morning I sent a letter to the chairman regarding this development and hope a hearing will be scheduled so that the committee can get to the bottom of this. And he has assured me that he will fully cooperate, and I think agrees with my concern. Now let me talk about this hearing. In the last year, we have witnessed unprecedented interventions by the government to commit trillions of taxpayer dollars to save too big to fail institutions. The taxpayer continues to be given the bill as the government continues this cycle of bailouts. One way to end the cycle would be to allow for an orderly liquidation of complex financial institutions that are not subject to the statutory regime for resolving banks administered by the FDIC. At a hearing last July, I stated that our regulators must strive for a system where financial firms can succeed or fail without threatening the whole financial system and placing taxpayers at risk. By creating this process of which non-banks whose failures would have systemic consequences could be unwound in an orderly fashion, we would restore balance and force firms to face the consequences of their actions. However, it is essential that any new regime for resolving or liquidating non-banks not rely on taxpayer funding. However, the Treasury legislative proposal released yesterday suggests the administration is considering using taxpayer funding to pay the cost of resolving these failed financial firms. This, to me, is unacceptable and would serve only to promote moral hazard and perpetrate a too-big-to-fail doctrine that the American people have squarely rejected. The proposal also leaves it to the Secretary and the FDIC to decide whether the firm will receive financial assistance or be placed in conservatorship. This empowers federal regulators with incredible discretion, and some of the past experience that I have witnessed indicates that this discretion is not always administered fairly or even-handedly. If the goal of the resolution process is to end the too-big-to-fail premise, why is a potential taxpayer subsidy part of the administration's solution? Mr. Chairman, there are many more unanswered questions, like which firms will be designated as systemically important and why. When will a liquidation be triggered? What happens if there is a disagreement between regulators on the need for a conservatorship? How will the regulators determine whether to provide financial assistance or place a firm in conservatorship? The details are important. Even more important is that we develop the right solution and not rush to poorly vetted legislation. I do commend you and agree with you that we do need a resolution process. The modernization of our regulatory structure will be the most important task this committee undertakes this Congress. The complex and interconnected nature of our financial markets require us to engage in thorough analysis with all the major stakeholders. I conclude by saying I hope that the committee will have additional hearings on this proposal so that we can hear from the stakeholders and regulators on their views, identify any unintended consequences in advance, and take a look at some past resolutions which have caused real questions and issues which I think have not been resolved. So I appreciate your attendance today.